Now this is some bullshit. I got this box of old anime from my uncle. Malice Horriblest Quest 29? That shouldn't have been in there. Oh man, I remember this show from when I was a kid. I used to watch it on Toonami. Remember that? Let's see if this video game can rekindle some of that childhood wonder. Inuyasha, a Feudal Fairy Tale for the original Sony PlayStation, is a 2D fighting game based upon the Inuyasha manga and anime, which began in 1996. Created by manga author Rumiko Takahashi, who is also the creator of Ranma 1/2, which last review I covered Ranma 1/2 Hard Battle on the Super Nintendo. Inuyasha is a series with a simple Alice in Wonderland story premise. A young girl named Kagome from present-day Japan is mysteriously transported to a mythological Japan's past. There, she encounters Inuyasha, a demon whom she sets free, and this sets her off on a huge adventure. Along the way, Kagome will encounter the other main characters of this series, many of which are playable or included in the video game. Notable characters include Sango, Shippo, Miroku, Koga, and some other villains including Sesshomaru and the evil Naraku. The gameplay here is pretty standard and fairly basic Street Fighter II style fighting game combat. Although this was released on the PlayStation in 2003 and in an era of gaming where 3D was the big thing, the game remains in 2D sprite style animation. Little to no 3D effects are used in this game. To me, that seems pretty fitting for both an anime-based game and as a tournament fighter, especially on the limited hardware of the PlayStation 1. One of the greatest things about Inuyasha that might go overlooked by initial game reviews is the game's simplicity. It's equal parts not too deep of a fighter and not too deep into the story of the anime. Sure, there are many references to the anime series that longtime and hardcore fans will love to see in-game, but the story is an adaptation of pre-existing story from the show, and as someone who is not too familiar with the animated series, as far as I know, there was no new story content. The game can be entirely played and enjoyed without watching the anime. The gameplay actually begins by selecting a game mode from the main menu screen. Feudal Fairy Tale is the name of the main story mode. It is single player and you can choose from any character to play as. You unlock new characters by playing this mode. There are also other modes including Versus Fairy Tale where you fight a computer or local player opponent. Dream Fairy Tale is a tag team style fight variation on Versus, again with a computer or a friend. Myoga's Training, referring to the character Myoga the Flea, allows you to learn the gameplay controls and movesets. Shippo's 7 Changes is a creative take on the options menu, where you can adjust various gameplay settings as well as save and load your game files. Backpack is a set of unlockables you earn by playing. These include minigames, pictures, music, and sound effects where you can change the voice clips characters say in-game. Upon selecting your character to fight as in Feudal Fairy Tale mode, you are shown a brief introductory slideshow, which gets you up to speed with where in the anime the story of the game takes place. It's not animated, but it's voice narrated in Japanese. Another thing that I personally love about the game is that Bandai did not go all out redoing the game to adapt it for the North American audience. Much of the original Japanese content is left intact, voices are all left undubbed, and there's a surprising amount of voice work in this game. The only downside here is to the English dub fans, who will not get to hear the recognizable shouts of Kagome and Inuyasha throughout this game. The game's choice of who you fight next is up to you as you move around a map screen to progress through the game. Depending on which character you choose to play as, there will be different opponents and minigames on the map. Opponents can be heroes or villains. Since Inuyasha is a fighting game, a lot of the core gameplay is simple yet deep, something that can be hard to describe without actually playing for yourself. There are basic inputs for moves, and each character has their own attack actions assigned to each of the face buttons on the controller. While they have different movesets, most characters play essentially the same. On the game screen, 2 characters are present in a fight. You have different backgrounds and some small unique stage hazards such as breakable walls, but most levels are flat. On the HUD, you have the player's health, their spiritual gauge for pulling off super attacks. You also have the time limit in the center. If you are doing a tag team battle, your teammate will be in the lower corner of the screen. It's interesting to notice that in the main story mode of the game you fight 1-round battles instead of 2 like in most fighting games. Controls are also pretty basic and share button actions with those of other 2D fighters. You have a strong, weak, and counterattack buttons, indicated by triangle, circle, and X respectively. Circle and forward is also a throw attack. Square button is used for your special attacks, which I'll get to in a moment. To guard with your character in times of defense, you hold back on the D-pad walking away from your opponent. The shoulder buttons are used as well, with L1 being step back, R1 being step forward, L2 is tag out to a team member, and R2 is a double attack with a teammate. Special attacks performed with the square button are simply attacks that are unique to each character. For example, Inuyasha might use his claws. There are also super special attacks, which require your spiritual gauge to be filled before using. The spirit gauge can be filled by attacking or by getting hit from an enemy. Each super special attack is the most powerful attack a character can do, so make sure it is not blocked and makes a solid hit. Upon successfully hitting with a super special, there is a brief cutscene and an attack animation. Characters will use recognizable techniques from the series such as Inuyasha's Tetsaiga sword attack. When in a tag team battle, the R2 button allows you to pull off a double attack, where both team members attack without switching out. This also uses some of your team gauge. A little bit about the controller I used in this game. I went with the original PlayStation controller, not the DualShock. While you can use the DualShock or later PlayStation series controllers, the thumbsticks give no input on this game. Personally, I find that on 2D fighters, things like thumbsticks can get in the way. Hardcore players might want to try out the arcade-style fight joysticks. There is one other thing to know regarding controls, the Sacred Jewel's Shards. In single-player story Feudal Fairy Tale, there are shards of the Sacred Jewel you will have to collect to truly complete each character's story. You can get these through mini-games, but also in fights. To get them in fights, first check the in-game HUD. If a character has them indicated next to their name, then they have shards to collect. By using a specific attack indicated in the World Pause menu, you can hit them with it to collect shards. The shards will drop on the ground and you have to pick them up, but be careful as they can be stolen from you too. You will use these shards later, a specified amount from Miyoga, to unlock things such as new characters. Other content in this game includes minigames. Minigames, as I mentioned earlier, are a way to earn shards of the Sacred Jewel. In Feudal Fairy Tale mode, they are scattered around the world map. You won't always have the same minigames each time. There are a total of 3 different minigames. Each minigame uses the same controls from fights. One of the minigames involves breaking a giant boulder by fighting it, very similar to the minigames in Street Fighter 2, where you have to destroy the car. In the second minigame, you'll have to put out a dangerous magic fire while dodging evil insects and reach the enemy controlling the flame. The third minigame is where you have to defeat a certain amount of flying insects. You lose time if Shippo is dragged away by the evil insects. These minigames grant you shards based upon how good you did during them. Now let's talk about the flaws of this game. While I'd say overall, Inuyasha is a step up and an improvement from Ranma 1/2 Hard Battle on the Super Nintendo, it does have a few flaws which are specific to this game. Thankfully, to me, the flaws are very minor. One minor flaw, more of an annoyance really, is when you pull off a super special attack. There is a brief pause in the game and a short clip of an animated still. This gets in the way of gameplay a bit, and with fighting games you don't want any lag or interruptions. Though they are neat to look at, removing the art still and the loading would solve this issue. The biggest problem Inuyasha faces that is both good and bad is the game's simplicity. Yes, it's great to have a basic 2D fighter with tag battles based on the anime, while still holding up in its core gameplay, but it doesn't do anything new or exciting to improve the fighting game genre. There's not too much to make this stand out other than it's a basic, at this point of release a dated 2D fighter set in an Inuyasha theme. But then again, being optimistic here, it does what it does very well. Now here's some positive points of the game Inuyasha. Some of the major positive things about this game include keeping the story and characters simple. Simple enough that non-fans can still enjoy it as if it were not based on an anime. The inclusion of tag team battles is a great touch and adds a lot to the game. There are many things to unlock, such as most of the characters, artwork, music, and minigames. The gameplay itself is similar to that of Street Fighter 2, and is pulled off surprisingly well for a TV show based game, yet doesn't do much new for the fighting game genre once again. Another thing to note is the soundtrack has some memorable tracks, as well as some memorable voice clips in Japanese from the characters. Although I don't understand what they're saying, it seems to be acted well. One more thing is the graphics. I love that they kept it 2D. I love that the background and effects are also 2D. I also really enjoy whenever the camera in the game zooms in to see the attacks a bit closer up, a neat graphical effect. And that is mostly how the game of Inuyasha, a Feudal Fairy Tale plays out. You select a familiar Inuyasha character, see a little backstory cutscene, travel a world map, and fight other characters with fun minigames along the way. At the end of the map, when all others are defeated, you head into the villain's lair to battle him face to face. Honestly, he is a bit of a letdown. Not a giant or super powerful boss fight, but more like a regular fighter. I didn't get a full sense of completion because he was easy enough to be a regular fighter. To me, I wanted a bit more out of a final boss fight, but as someone who doesn't know that much about the Inuyasha series, I don't know his true strengths. To sum it all up, Inuyasha, a Feudal Fairy Tale on the original Sony PlayStation is a fun, and I would say underrated game based upon the anime series Inuyasha. There are some minor flaws and it helps to be a fan of the anime, but the game is, in my opinion, very easy to pick up and play, and to understand to those not familiar with the series or its characters. Honestly, if I compared it to Street Fighter 2 or 3, I'd say Inuyasha, the game alone, does a better job of showing me who the characters are and their stories. Although in the gameplay you can see how it is lacking compared to the Street Fighter games. There's a few small flaws here and there, and it doesn't go too deep, but it does a lot more than you might expect. Some of the best things going for it are simple controls, tag team battles, recognizable characters, and a decent yet short story for each of them. I'll briefly add that this game has a great soundtrack. I definitely recommend Inuyasha, a Feudal Fairy Tale to any anime, manga, or 2D fighting game fan. It might get you into the series, or it might get series fans into 2D fighters. This game is exactly like I remembered, but better. It's so good. Hello?
Hi, this is Uncle Brian. Are you enjoying my videotapes?
Oh yes I am, but there was some strange video called a hentai quest something or other.
Oh, isn't that hentai whatever the f***? Pop it in and see what it is. I know you will love it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Thanks, Uncle Brian.
Wait, I forgot to tell you about the porn.
I have an idea.